Thank you all so much for coming out. Welcome to Ticket to Colombia. We hope that this evening will be just an immersive experience of that country's riches, from its art and culture, literature, music, all of the above. There's so much to offer, and we're so glad that you're here to experience it with us. So this is the first ever in a series at the Green Space in collaboration with my venture, the Alignist. Each show will focus on a different country. This evening, of course, is Colombia, and next up we have Rwanda. And our hope is that this will become a vibrant live action performance of a book club, basically, because it's all based around a book. This time it's The Sound of Things Falling by Juan Gabriel Vásquez. We'll have him here to talk more about that book. And other than that, we have a really great lineup. I'm really excited for all of the performers that are here today. But before I get too much into that, I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the Alignist. I started the Alignist because I felt like we're living in a world where we're constantly bombarded with the news. It's hard enough to keep up with what's happening out of Washington, much less what's going on across the world. And I feel like international news has really been sidelined. And as someone who started my career reporting across the world, I really wanted to find a way to make that engaging, because we're all struggling to keep up with every little blast on our phones. And so this is also an effort to kind of pull you away from the screen. So I thought I'd just start by telling you a little bit about what each box contains. It's a box subscription service, and the idea is that it connects fact to fiction. Not in like a fake news kind of way, but yes, but in a way that lets books guide you to the truth. Because that's the power of a good book, right? You can be transported to another world and just be totally immersed in a setting that you may never have experienced previously. So that's the conceit of the Alignist. So it connects fact to fiction and novels to news, and breaks down some of the biggest stories in a particular country in a way that's easily digestible. So I thought I'd just give you a way to, I'll just do a little quick demo so you can kind of see it in action. So each box goes out once every 3 months, and it contains a novel. So the first one, The Sound of Things Falling. So you'll get that novel, and then as you read, you'll be guided to certain parts in the book. And those parts correspond with this roadmap, your guide to understanding Colombia through the lens of this book. And so when you get to a part, for example, about a plane crash at an air show in 1938, maybe you'll wonder, is that real? Did the author make that up? And perhaps you'll be inclined to pull out your phone and do some quick Googling and figure it out, but that would take you away from the story, right? And so if you get this roadmap, you'll find that in fact, there was a plane crash in 1938 in Colombia. And this plane crashed into the stands where a lot of government officials, including the president-elect, were seated. And it was horrible. A lot of people died. And weirdly enough, the president-elect didn't want to be there because he had been at another air show in France where the same thing happened. And the French Minister of War was beheaded. Isn't that crazy? This is the kind of things I learn when I'm creating these. And you can learn too by reading about this. And it really sort of goes to show that the truth is stranger than fiction in a lot of ways, and that if you really just go deep, there's so much to learn. And I hope that it inspires a sense of curiosity, of wonder, and a desire to know more about the world around you. And once you've done that, gone through the novel, experienced the roadmap, maybe the next time you get a little push notification about the country you're reading about, you'll feel like you have an in. And maybe you'll open that story and you'll know some of the names and you'll know some of the issues. And so the world won't feel so far away anymore. Suddenly you'll have a connection. So that's the big picture idea of the Alignist. But it's not just about the doom and gloom, the news and the politicians and the wars. It's also about the culture of a place. So each box also aims to give you a little taste, a little flavor of the country that you're reading about. So that happens through little recipes from chefs who are versed in the cuisine of that country. Most of them are from the countries that they are offering up these recipes from. So maybe you can cook up some of those recipes while reading and have this kind of immersive reading experience. There's also other ways to taste the country, taste Colombia in this instance, through these products that are like artisan products. This bar of chocolate is amazing. For every bar of chocolate that Original Beans sells, they plant a tree. And this bar is made with these like white cocoa beans that everyone thought were extinct for a while. But no, they're not, and they're in this bar of chocolate. So that's it. So you get a little taste of the country and some little craft items. So this one came with a bracelet. And they're all fair trade, right? So you get a sense of like the texture, the culture, the flavors of a country delivered to your door so you can experience it from home. And that is what the Alignist does every 3 months. So this show is kind of like the box IRL, live on stage. So we'll have the author here to talk about his novel. Juan Gabriel Vásquez will talk with us soon. But we also wanted this to be like a really robust celebration of the culture of Colombia. So we have musical performances, 2, in fact. And we also have just a slew of great conversations to come with some of the just pinnacles of Colombian arts and dance and theater. And to make it truly multi-sensory, you may have enjoyed some pastries from a Colombian bakery, Rico Pon, which were wonderful. And you may have seen some photos playing on the screens there by photojournalist Mads Neeson, who has spent about 10 years documenting the conflict in Colombia. So we have a whole lot more coming. Wonderful show lined up. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first performers. Daniel Fetekwa is a soloist with the Limon Dance Company, and he's the founder and artistic director of Pajarillo Pintao, a dance company focused on folk art, or folk dance. And Pablo Mayor is a composer, musician, and educator, and he's the leader of the band Folklore Urbano. He's also the founder of the Colombian Music Festival, Encuentro NYC, which has been running in the city for 14 years now. So let's welcome Danielle and Pablo to the green space. Thank you so much for that. So Danielle's just going to get changed really quickly, and he'll be right back. And in the meantime, I'd also like to introduce our next guest for a panel. We'll have Pablo Mayor joining us on stage in conversation, as well as Germán Jaramillo, who you might recognize from a little show called Narcos. So we'll talk to him about that. And he also is the founder of Teatro Libre, a theater house in Colombia, as well as ID Studio Theater in the South Bronx. So please give it up for Germán Jaramillo. All right, so I think we can, oh, he's not back. Sorry. I think we can just start maybe, we'll ask about the performance. That was all improv. That was not rehearsed. So we'll have to ask about how that all happened when Danielle is back. But maybe I can just put a question to you, Germán, to start with. So tell me about ID Studio Theater. Why did you found it, and what is it like to work with immigrant communities in this city?
We founded the company in 2001. We have been working in Manhattan, in the whole part of the area of New York since that. We started the company in the Dominican community in the north of Manhattan for several years. And then we moved to the neighborhood where the Colombians live in Jackson Heights for another 3 or 4 years. And then we moved to Manhattan, to the Theater for the New City. We received the support of Crystal Field, an extraordinary woman, and she gave us the opportunity to work in her theater. And we performed in several places, and theaters, and professional theaters, and colleges, and schools, and many places. And in the last 5 years, we moved to the South Bronx, because one of the members of our company bought a house in the South Bronx, and she gave us as a main house for the company. So now we are working basically in the South Bronx. But since the beginning, our main target has been basically the underserved communities in the city, and culturally underserved communities, basically immigrants. But we work in English and in Spanish, because we also have the idea that all the traditions that we bring with us from our country, we can really show that beautiful tradition in theater and performing arts to the American audiences too. For that reason, we perform in Spanish and in English.
And I imagine that that's really powerful for the people involved too, to show a different side of their countries.
Yeah, also because we work with a mixture of actors, very well-trained actors, professional actors. Some of them came from Colombia, some of them from other countries, and from Spain, from Mexico, from one artist from Russia, one artist from Japan. We work in different, in that sense, that trying to know really, maybe focus only on modern theater. We also do a lot of adaptations, and from Latin American authors, and basically from Latin American authors.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have Danielle Patekwa back with us, and so just I thought you and Pablo could maybe start by talking a little bit about that piece. I'm just curious about what you were thinking individually, and also maybe like telepathically between you two. So just what was going through your minds, and what was some of the feelings you were trying to represent?
Well, when we talk, one of the main things, we were talking about Colombia. The main idea was, let's talk a little bit about every part of Colombia. And we have, we divided 4 regions: the Andes region, the plains that we share with Venezuela, and then the Caribbean and Pacific coasts. And that was sort of, in my mind, that was sort of the skeleton of the piece. I don't know if you want to add to that.
So we have been working with Pablo for a long time, sharing different spaces, stages, different shows and performance, creating work. I got a commission for Harlem Stage with the Jerome Foundation to create a piece. That was the first solo I made in New York, 2008, Pachamama. And I say, Pablo, why you don't, I have just met Pablo a year before, and I say, Pablo, why you don't help me? I want live music, original music for this. And that was our first collaboration, and since then, it has been just a marriage. Paulo's wife is here, but we have been married. But it's really, it's amazing because we have been working for so many years and doing different pieces, and he has created, and I choreographed for him. I have created, he has composed for me. That once we are on the stage, and this was an amazing experience, he just have to play and I just have to dance. And then things come out. This was an improvisation, but we have been working on, there are 4 pieces there that we have choreographed, and each piece has been choreographed: Bambuco Territown, Chandies, Pachamama, and then the
Zapateo.
The Zapateo. And they're all different pieces. So when we have this, I say, okay, this is the moment to, only for the 2 of us, to get on the stage and just play. Un juego. So we play and
they show Colombia to us. They represent what Colombia is. At least, my focus has always been on working with the rhythms and the music from Colombia, and presenting a new version of it. That something that could be more contemporary.
Yeah. No, I saw the play. It seemed like you were having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I did.
And I want to ask Herman, for you, on playing characters who are less less free-spirited maybe, but I'm just wondering about what is it like to represent looming figures in history. The character you play in Narcos, maybe you could tell us a little bit about him and kind of what it was like for you to bring a character like that, knowing that the audience would not be so familiar as most probably Colombians would be.
The character that I played in Narcos was the Attorney General of Colombia. It's Gustavo de Grave, who just died a year ago. Was an extraordinary lawyer and thinker and professor of law in Colombia. He was the dean of the president of the university where Juan Gabriel Vásquez was educated as a lawyer, Universidad del Rosario. And then he was named the first Attorney General in Colombia just after the reform of the Constitution. We had a constitution for 110 years, which was signed by the Sacred Cœur of Jesus, Sacred Heart of Jesus. Was then in the name of Sacred Heart of Jesus, we Colombians for 110 years, so only since 1886 and 1993, the reform of the Constitution brought the figure of the Attorney General. The first one was that character, and was precisely in the moment when the crisis with Pablo Escobar was the most complicated. The series is about the rise. I was in the second season. The first season was about the rise of Escobar. The second season was about the fall. So my character was really very representative of one aspect of this tragedy, which became up in Colombia, because Dr. de Grave was the first person who spoke about legalization of drugs. He confronted a lot the Attorney General of the United States at that time, Mrs. Janet Reno, and also as a sanction, he received the cancellation of his American visa, even as an Attorney General. And he was a very courageous man. And also when he confronted Escobar, he confronted him himself. He confronted him in the way that he was not decided to kill him, which is the basic idea of the army and the police, and also for the president. His idea was to really bring him to justice and try to make an example, to try to establish a solid system, judiciary system in Colombia, because it's the first time that we have a prosecutor of that kind. I met him. I visited him before I started the shooting of the season. I was very lucky because I was directed by 4 extraordinary different directors. The script of the production was extraordinary, very, very, very good done. And we had also the main character, which is an extraordinary Brazilian actor, Wagner Moura, who did have extraordinary vision of the character of Escobar, because it was not really like a portrait, pintoresque portrait of a narco man. Wagner had the capacity as an actor to go inside of the really what sense the soul of this man was really damaged, and his perversion was really one of the most tragic things that happened in Colombian history. So for that reason, I performed that role. I was very lucky to be in that role, but it's not really. For me as an actor, I had my first character I worked basically in Colombia for many years as a theater actor. I founded one of the most important companies. I co-founded one of the most important theater companies in Colombia, the Teatro Libre. I worked there for 25 years. And I came to the States in 2000 and founded ID Studio. And I came basically because I did a very extraordinary film, Our Lady of the Assassins, which is also a coda film in the film history in Colombia, because it's the first film about this kind of tragedy that Colombia suffered for many years.
Well, I want to ask about that, because it seems a lot of you have done work and created work around these really kind of harrowing moments in Colombian history. El Bogotosa, I know you made a symphony about that. You've worked on kind of representing some massacres. But what is it, do you feel a tension in kind of trying to represent that, but also move past it and show some other sides of the country? How do you kind of negotiate that as artists? And anyone can respond. Maybe we can hear from Pablo on this.
So when I create Pajarillo Pintado, I was living in Germany, and every time I talk about Colombia, the first reactions were not very positive. So I say, I think I need to do some work here of sharing what Colombia really is. It's not what you get, but me, as this mix of a person. So I started Pajarillo Pintado, which is traditional dance company. And then when I moved to New York, I was here and I was like, wow, New York City is amazing. I came to dance with the Limon Dance Company as a soloist, but I started doing my own choreography. And there is so much to say and share about where, besides being Colombian, but where I'm coming from, what do I have to say as a person who is, or Jose Limon was an outsider too, so you're an outsider in how you can be, but also being part of the community, and how those roles play an important figure in supporting, learning, sharing, being part of the one universe and not being only just Colombian. So I don't consider myself just Colombian. I consider myself of the whole planet, and I have been able to break walls in terms of like visas, and I toured with Limon for 10 years, the whole world, and but the most important thing is that we are all humans, and we all feel the same. You love, you hate. It's the human part. So being able to share another humanistic side, another humanistic stories like Colombian. I did a piece based on the massacre of Bogota, happened in 2012, and I did it in 2002, and I did it in 2012. And I was able to visit Bogota. I got a grant from NALAC to go there, and it was a beautiful exchange experience. I was in Colombia, but I felt like an outsider. And I was like, wow, okay, so I have to share. And then I came here and say, well, this is happening now. It's happening right now. I want to share this with you guys on the stage. And it was a great turnout of a voice to share. And that's what we do in education part too. So we have the program Colombian Cumbia for Kids. Right. And we go to schools and teach. And
do you want to just share some final thoughts on that?
Well, in my case, I live in Bogota and in Cali, and I grew up as a kid in a private school. Through music, I started to see outside of my safe environment, playing music I get to play for a lot of mafia people, doing gigs from first communions to big parties. And then when I was able to come to the States to study, it was shocking to me when I would say, "Oh, are you from Colombia? Hey, you got some, give me some." And you start to hear the joke, and it starts to get old, And then the other part of when I get the knowledge and I get my master's, and I'm like, okay, what am I gonna do? I say I'm gonna go home and think about things, and I found, I remember how difficult it was to study music in Colombia and the music that I wanted, and I say I want to do Colombian music, and that was the beginning. And then my girlfriend in the last semester, she moved to New York, and I'm like, oh, this is an omen. So I moved to New York, and I started working on Colombian music, on pushing Colombian music, and educating myself, educating people on Colombian music, educating an audience that all of a sudden was really interested. We started a festival. We've been doing a festival for 14 years.
Right. I want to just quickly, maybe you can tell us what's coming up in New York, and then you'll have to close it out. What should we see if we want to see Colombian music or dance? What's going on?
Well, now there is a lot of there are a lot of artists doing Colombian music, or Colombian artists doing. You're Colombian, so it comes through you. But I wanted to say that with my new project, I've been doing Colombian music for a long time, but my new project goes back to Colombia, to the fact that Colombians were not really studying Colombian music. They were doing salsa, pop, everything. And one of the strongest genres that Colombians, at least in Cali, where I was a teenager, influenced my life was salsa music. So now I'm doing salsa music in New York because it's
sabroso.
Yeah, great synergy here.
Well, El Barrio Project is called.
Thank you all so much, Pablo, Herman, Danielle. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciated your thoughts, and I think we'll all hang out afterwards so we can find you with more questions.
Thank you.
Tell us
very
what
much.
gigs are coming up.
Thank you.
Okay, so Thank you so much. It's great seeing you. Thanks. All right, we've got. Oh. So we've got another panel for you, this time with Juan Gabriel Vásquez, the author, who is the centerpiece of this event. He was born in Bogota and came of age there in the city as it was being racked by violence. So he's the author of several novels, including The Sound of Things Falling, which we'll discuss today. And he's coming out. So Juan. And welcome. Here. Yes. That's great. Thank you. And we'll also have Maria McFarland Sanchez Moreno, who is the executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance, an organization which advocates for the end of the war on drugs. And for more than a decade, she worked at Human Rights Watch and was most recently the co-director of its Americas program. She's also the author of a book called There Are No Dead Here, a story of murder and denial in Colombia. So, Maria, welcome. So I thought we could sort of start this discussion just to set a bit of a tone from the book with a reading. And so this book is set, and you can tell us maybe in brief, but it's set in Bogota kind of in the decades after some of the worst violence that in that city. And it follows a character named Antonio who has been touched by this violence as a victim of it, and how he kind of navigates through the story of trying to understand his past, understand his place in Colombian history. So I thought I'd just ask Juan to kind of read a little bit to give it a tone for those who haven't read the book of what it sounds like.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Beenish, for the wonderful invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. So this is from the very beginning of the novel. At the time, this is the voice of the character, Antonio Yamara. At the time, my city was beginning to emerge from the most violent years of its recent history. I'm not talking about the violence of cheap stabbings and stray bullets, the settling of accounts between low-grade dealers, but the kind that transcends the small resentments and small revenges of little people. The violence whose actors are collectives and written with capital letters: the state, the cartel, the army, the front. We Bogotanos had become accustomed to it, partially because its images arrived with extraordinary regularity in our news reports and papers. That day, the images of the most recent attack had begun to appear in the form of a breaking news bulletin on the television screen at the billiards club. First, we saw the reporter presenting the news from outside the door of the country clinic. Then we saw the image of the bullet-riddled Mercedes. Through the shut window, we saw the back seat, broken glass, smears of dry blood. And finally, when all movement had ceased at all the tables and everyone had quieted down and someone had shouted to turn up the sound, we saw, above the dates of birth and the still fresh one of his death, the face of the victim in black and white. It was the conservative politician Álvaro Gómez, son of one of the most controversial presidents of the century and himself candidate for the presidency more than once. Nobody asked why he'd been killed, or by whom, because such questions no longer had any meaning in my city, or they were asked in a mechanical fashion as the only way to react to the latest shock. I didn't think so at the time, but those crimes, magnicides, they called them in the press, I learned the meaning of the little word very early, had provided the backbone of my life or punctuated it like the unexpected visits of a distant relative. I was 14 years old that afternoon in 1984 when Pablo Escobar killed or ordered the killing of his most illustrious pursuer, the Minister of Justice Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. Two hitmen on a motorcycle, a curve on 127th Street. I was 16 when Escobar killed or ordered the killing of Guillermo Cano, publisher of El Espectador. A few steps away from the newspaper's offices, the assassin put 8 bullets in his chest. I was 19 and already an adult, although I hadn't voted yet, on the day of the death of Luis Carlos Galán, a presidential candidate whose assassination was different or is different in our imaginations because it was seen on TV. The crowd cheering Galán, then the machine gun fire, then the body collapsing on the wooden platform, falling soundlessly, or its sound hidden by the uproar or by the first screams. And shortly afterward, there was the Avianca plane, a Boeing 727-21 that Escobar had blown up in midair, somewhere in the air between Bogota and Cali, to kill a politician who wasn't even on board. Thank you. Nice module.
Thank you so much for that reading. I want to start by asking you about your own experiences of kind of running into some of that violence. If you could just talk about this bombing that you just barely missed and how it sort of shaped you as a writer and as someone who is seeking to investigate the past and the powers that be.
Yeah, well, I'm part of this generation. I think we have a very special position in recent Colombian history. I was born in 1973. This means roughly on the same year as the DEA was founded, the Drug Enforcement Agency. I was born 3 years after Richard Nixon closed the Mexican border because too much marijuana was coming into the United States. And 4 years after Nixon had pronounced the words as part of national policy for the first time, war on drugs. So I'm part of that generation that was born with the trade and that came of age at more or less at the same time as drug trafficking was coming of age in their own way. It was becoming the most serious danger to have ever, or rather that the country had ever faced. So I saw the country change. I had a reasonably quiet childhood in a country that was reasonably manageable. And I became an adult during the time of the bombings and the shootings in the streets and the killings of politicians, at a time in which really we learned to live in a sort of perpetual state of menace, state of threat. We all, Colombians of that generation, Bogotanos of that generation, we all remember a close call of some sort, a moment in which we came very close to suffering the violence directly, or maybe we suffered it directly. In 1993, this is the moment you were referring to. I was a law student. I was in the middle, I think, of my 3rd year of law school, and this is the moment when I was discovering that being a lawyer didn't interest me in the least. That what I really wanted to do was try to write novels. I had always been a reader. Literature had always been important for me, but this is the moment in which I discovered that this was my vocation. So I started spending a lot of time in downtown Bogota, going around. This is the sound of things falling.
There we have it.
Yeah. I started going around the secondhand bookshops in downtown Bogota, looking for the books that were shaping my idea of what I wanted to do. Garcia Marquez, Carlos Fuentes, Cortázar, Borges, the Latin American boom. And so one of those days, 30th of January, I think, was the first school day for high schools and young children in downtown Bogota. And I had just, I wanted to go by these secondhand bookshops that exist there. They still are there. But I decided for some reason that first I would go around the corner and visit some other place, this stationery seller that sold books, secondhand books again. It was full of people. because it was the first day. And so mothers were buying their children's things, and children were there with their mothers. So I decided I wouldn't go there. I would go to my plan A and visit the other place. As soon as I turned the corner, a bomb went off in front of the stationery shop, because the Chamber of Commerce was around those places. And Pablo Escobar, as a part of his terrorist campaign against the Colombian state, had decided to bomb the streets in front of the Chamber of Commerce. So, I say it with no solemnity whatsoever. This almost got me. But we all have that story. We all have some sort of story that resembles this one. At some point, it became unavoidable that I should write about these things, try to write about what it is, how it changed us as individuals, but also as a society, to live with this kind of, or rather during this kind of undeclared war. With this kind of perpetual fear and the notion of the risk, the unpredictable violence. Living in a state of unpredictable violence changes people. Right. And I wanted to know how.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's the individual experience of that, of, what we roughly call the drug wars, and then there's the policy level. So I wanted to ask you, Maria, about some of the bigger picture issues that Juan brought up, specifically the closing of the border, and how that impacted how we perceive, how that kind of shifted the drug wars, and especially, now that we have a president who often says that he would like to close the border as a way to stop illegal drugs, illegal immigration. I'm just wondering what that event kind of meant in the history of drug policy for America, and how it sort of shaped the course of the drug wars and impacted Colombia.
I mean, the story of U.S. involvement with Colombia starts really not so much with drugs, but with ideology, with the Cold War. It goes way back to the 50s. And it's part of a policy that the U.S. had throughout Latin America of containing Soviet influence in the region. And so you always have to remember when you're talking about Colombia that that is a big part of how the U.S. has always approached the country. Colombia, even before the drug war that involved Escobar, had an internal armed conflict involving left-wing guerrillas, right-wing paramilitary groups, the military, which the U.S. was interested in, and where the U.S. was siding with the government against the guerrillas. When you start seeing cocaine being imported into the U.S. from Colombia in larger quantities in the 70s and 80s, that coincided with a domestic effort in the United States to really crack down on certain groups that were viewed as undesirable, right? Specifically, Black people and hippies, according to Nixon's aides. That's been documented. It's well established that the war on drugs that Nixon started, and which Reagan ramped up, and which we're still living with today, was driven by that motivation. And so then when the U.S. approaches Colombia in the 80s and really starts to pour more and more money into the Colombian military, into interdiction, into surveillance, all of that is about two different things. One is this commitment to a war on drugs that has a lot to do with domestic issues in the U.S., and it's also this ideological piece that I mentioned at the beginning.
In some ways, so in the book, The Sound of Things Falling, the sort of the characters who kind of start to experiment in trafficking drugs are tied to the American Peace Corps, and that's, of course, persistent rumor in Colombia, but also something that the American Peace Corps has vehemently denied. And in some ways, I wonder, of course, But in some ways, I also wonder, there's kind of that, there's a real kind of metaphorical power too, maybe. So I just wonder why you would have included those volunteers.
Well, it has been a contentious passage in the novel, obviously. But I would just like to say, I've received a share of criticism about this from people who say this is impossible because the Peace Corps would have never allowed this. Well, of course, these characters of mine did not ask for permission from the Peace Corps to get involved with drug traffickers. But also the idea that the novel, in some sense, establishes or suggests the idea that the Peace Corps as an institution was responsible is just silly. It's just a silly way of reading novels. The novels are about individuals, and these are individuals who, in such and such context, made the wrong decisions.
Yeah. I guess at the same time, I'm really interested in, you seem to have a really strong commitment to the truth. I just, unpacking the book as I did for the roadmap, I was really surprised to find even like the black box recordings that you mentioned are like actually transcriptions from a black box recording. So I wonder what you see as the role of truth in fiction and, kind of pushing against, as you've done this, the magical realism of so many of your, forebears of.
Yeah, well, I always thought as a novelist that there's a very short sentence in a book by Milan Kundera, a Czech writer that I adore, who says that the novel's only reason for being is to say what only the novel can say. What does this mean? It means that to write a novel, to tell you what you already can find in the newspapers or in great journalism such as Maria's, or in TV documentaries, it's just redundant. Novels should try to tell you something else, the other side, the invisible side, the hidden side of reality. And this is what I try to do with my books. I grew up as a Colombian with this wealth of information about the drug wars, with pictures such as the pictures of the images of the bombed planes and the bombed buildings, and with statistics about the number of deaths, and with even videos of Luis Carlos Galán getting shot and killed during a rally in Colombia. So I have this wealth of information about the visible side of the drug trade. What about the invisible side? Where do we go to try to find out how that shaped us as individuals, in our intimate lives, in our private lives? Where do you go to try to understand what happened to a single person living through that period? You don't go to historiography, you don't go to great journalism to find what happened inside to people in that area that, as a shortcut we may call the soul. What happens to the soul of individuals? Mm-hmm. Only novels can tell this, and this is what I try to do.
Mm-hmm. And in your work, Maria, of course, is really pushing to find that truth, that unspoken truth. And there was a quote that struck me from the beginning of your book: if this country knew the whole truth, it would fall apart. And I think, in some ways, the pendulum has swung where a lot of people, think of Colombia, they no longer think cartels and cocaine. Maybe they think of sunny beaches and colorful cities. So I wonder if you could just tell me about that resistance to the truth and kind of what it might mean how the country would perhaps fall apart if it reckoned with the truth in a serious way.
Yeah, I mean, my book is called There Are No Dead Here, and it's drawn from a Garcia Marquez quote from...
May I tell it? May I tell it,
You
please?
may,
Yes.
Please do.
Because it's a great scene. It's a great scene. It's my favorite scene in 100 Years of Solitude, and it's a great choice on the part of Maria for the title of the book. It's the chapter in the novel that deals with the Masacre de las Bananeras, the banana plantation massacre, in which the Colombian army killed an indeterminate number of workers in 1928. And so the character in the novel goes around, after witnessing the massacre, he goes around the town of Macondo, asking if people know about the 3,000 deaths that he has seen. And there's this woman who tells him the same that other people in the novel will tell him later: there are no dead here. What are you talking about? Since the time of your grandfather, the colonel, nothing has happened in Macondo. And it's, of course, a metaphor of the inability of the country to deal with this very serious tragedy. Go ahead.
Exactly.
And thank you.
Thank you. No, I started working on Colombia when I was at Human Rights Watch as a researcher. I covered the armed conflict for about 6 years. And so I was traveling all over to very remote parts of the country that many Colombians wouldn't go to. And hearing really horrendous stories about things that were going on at a time when the Colombian government was already trying to sell this story that in Colombia, the only thing to fear is wanting to stay, right? That was kind of the tourism ad. Yeah. And that was just so jarring for me to see, because there are wonderful things in Colombia. I love Colombia, but I also was hearing these horror stories that were contemporaneous. And the book ends up telling the stories of 3 Colombians who tried to expose the truth and were, in one case, one character is killed for telling the truth, and the other 2 are successful in a way. And I think Colombian history has changed because of their truth-telling efforts. So I think ultimately my book is hopeful, and I think Colombians can make progress, have made progress because of the courage and dedication and commitment of many, many people who do care about the truth. Mm-hmm. But it's a really challenging thing because you still have all of this societal denial.
Mm-hmm. And for more on that, we'll have to check out your book, which I should say is on sale outside in the lobby, along with Juan's most recent book and The Sound of Things Falling. So, and he'll be around to sign books after. But thank you so much for your insights and for sharing them with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so we have one more act, and before I introduce them, I want to just take a moment. I want a different way. I'm going to have to sit here and introduce them. But okay, before I introduce our final act, I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about our next event. So I mentioned that it will be a ticket to Rwanda, and that's on November 19th. So if you're at all interested, please mark your calendars for that date. We are this year 25 years from the Rwandan genocide, and this novel does not necessarily deal with that carnage, but it does look at how society came to be so divided that a neighbor could turn against a neighbor, a husband against a wife, and a school child against another school child. The novel is actually set inside of a girls' boarding school. It's called Our Lady of the Nile, and it's by Scholastique Mukasonga, who I actually had the privilege of speaking with today. She's a powerful, resilient woman. She'll be joining us just via video on that day. But we'll have, again, a host of performers, of thinkers, of people who will represent many sides of the country. And so we'd love for you to join us for that event, again, on November 19th. And if you want to receive the box for Rwanda, you can sign up outside or at thealignist.com. And that box will go out to you within the next 2 weeks. So you'll have a full month to read the book before the next event, if that's of interest. So do your mark your calendars, November 19th. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce basically my new favorite band, Salt Cathedral. They are a duo, an indie pop duo of 2 Colombian musicians, Juliana Ronderos and Nicola Losado. And they're based here in New York City, so you can hear them play around town. And their music has been featured by Pitchfork, Fader, Billboard, basically all the big outlets, and you'll soon hear why. They're a real treat. Their sound is really unique. So without further ado, I want to give it up for Salt Cathedral.
Thank you so much for having us and for curating this event. This is we're very grateful to be here. Juan Gabriel happens to be Nico's favorite author currently, so he was a little bit starstruck. a story, and everybody has a body. Every story has a beginning, and every ending is a possibility for a new beginning. We're all tied to one another by our sameness and our differences. Flesh, skin, heart, body, bones, dance, hunger, movement, color, drive. And we as people will thrive once we remember other people's stories and give wings to their new beginnings. Don't want to forget this time. Don't want to forget this time. I am a holy son in a foreign land. My brothers and sisters, please hear my sighs. Don't let the silence travel through your ears, and I won't let it fade away this time. And I won't let it, and I won't let it fade away. I won't let it fade away this time. And I won't let it, and I won't let it fade away. Lying under the water, collecting shells, forgotten by all of mankind. Their stories pierce through their insides, and we won't let our hearts forget this time. And we won't let our hearts forget. We won't let our hearts forget this time. And we won't let our hearts forget this time. We won't let our hearts forget. Don't want to forget this. 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 And we won't let our hearts forget this time. Forget and fade away this time. Forget this time. Forget and fade away this time. And we won't let our hearts forget this time. And we won't let our hearts forget. We won't let our hearts forget this time. And we won't let our hearts forget this time. That song is called Holy Soul, and it's about not forgetting other people's stories, and it's a little bit of what they were talking about. And when I look back on it, it's like I could only have written that because I grew up in Colombia watching the news. Like, we need to collectively remember. Turn to me and tell me what you feel, and tell me if this is real, and I promise you I'll be no ordinary man. 'Cause I am what I am, and I'm falling gracefully down this path. I don't know, and I'm falling play one more song for you guys. Yeah, we're Salt Cathedral. Both of us grew up in Bogota, in Colombia, roughly like 10 blocks from each other, and then we came to meet in the US. And we've been here for 10 years now, this year, 10 years. So Colombia never leaves you. Playing one more song for you guys. A little bit more upbeat so we don't go home hearing about all this violence and hearing somber songs. I know that you're sitting tired and you've wanted to say that you're so done when everything hits the ground and you're losing your way. I want you to know, I know, I want you to love. Rude boy, I'm wishing you the bestest. Cruel boy, I know it's tough to encore and keep rooting for the best, but rude boy, polite, that I want you to love. And my tears on the weekend, to be fears that I'm peeking. Cool, alive, think you're in it for the right kind of reasons. 'Cause we're looking for a peace of mind, and we all wanna be electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. Oh, above the ground. Electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. Oh, above the ground. Electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. Don't we all wanna crank it loud and just feel like we'll stay and ride that wave, be resilient and never fade. But we all lose our way. I want you to know, I know, I want your love. Rude boy, I'm wishing you the bestest. Cruel boy, I know it's tough to encore and keep rooting for the quest, but rude boy, polite, that I want your love. And my tears on the weekend, drop your fears on a weekend. Cool, alive, I think you're in it for the right kind of reasons. 'Cause we're looking for a peace of mind, and we all wanna be electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. Oh, above the ground. Electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. Above the ground. We all wanna be electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. Electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. I know that your demons are trying to break you up. It'll never work, don't they ever learn that you and I, we're full of life. And my tears on the weekend, drop your fears and I'm peeking. Cool, alive, think you're in it for the right kind of reasons. 'Cause we're all looking for a peace of mind, and we all wanna be electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. And my tears on the weekend, drop your fears and I'm peeking. Cool, alive, I think you're in it for the right. Wanna feel electric, wanna feel electric, wanna feel electric, electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. Above the ground. Electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. Above the ground. Electric and feel like we're lifted above the ground. Rude boy, I'm wishing you the bestest. Cruel boy, I know it's tough to encore and keep rooting for the best, but rude boy, polite, that I want your love. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Keep it going for Salt Cathedral. That was amazing. Yes, that was wonderful.
Is your mic on? I don't
Yeah. Oh. Okay. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you to all of our performers, all of our panelists, and to all of you for coming out. You really helped to make our first ever ticket to event such a success. Again, mark your calendars for the next one, November 19th. And we'll all be in the lobby. There are books and boxes to buy. Please stick around. Come chat with us. Thank you.